Joe, you are live.
Thank you, Dan. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to join our Connecticut and Westchester live event. Our honored guest, Dr. Lawrence Yun, will be sharing some of his valuable insights as to the health of the real estate market pre-corona and what we should expect post-corona. Before I formally introduce Dr. Yun, I want you all to know, first and foremost, my main concern as we work our way through the complex business, social, and emotional issues of this pandemic, the health and safety of you and your families is paramount. Remember, we're all in this together. Even though many of our state governments have deemed real estate listing sales activity an essential service, we have decided in an abundance of caution to direct all work to be done from home until we get to the other side of COVID-19 and it's safe to begin to resume our normal business activities. I must say, I am more than impressed with the agility and creativity you all have shown in adapting to the new temporary norm. You're staying connected and engaged with your existing clients, your family, your colleagues through Zoom, FaceTime, and Microsoft Teams. You're making new business relationships through social media and attending many of our virtual educational offerings. You all should be receiving our pandemic-inspired daily dose communication, which Jackie Donahue and our marketing group send out each and every day. It talks about and has links to all of the virtual offerings of that day, as well as some social media assets that are available for your use. You know, 2020 kicked off in a very strong economy. The financial markets, the real estate market, interest rates, consumer confidence were all favorable. The novel coronavirus has caused a temporary setback in our business. However, it's really important to understand this is a health crisis and not a real estate crisis. The demand for housing hasn't stopped. It just may have been interrupted. And in some markets, in some communities, especially in the bedroom communities of New York City, the rental market has exploded with folks wanting to leave the city for the suburbs. We are fortunate to have Dr. Lawrence Yun joining us live to share his wisdom and professional insights. We should have some time for Q&A after Dr. Yun's presentation and remarks. Please use the chat feature to log in any questions that you might have for Dr. Yun, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. As most of you know, Dr. Yun, Dr. Lawrence Yun, is the Chief Economist and Senior Vice President for Research for the National Association of Realtors. He oversees and responsible for a wide range of research, including NAR's existing home statistics, the National Real Estate Affordability Index, the Home Buyers and Sellers Report, which provides real estate trends for us, the 1.4 million realtors. He also creates NAR's national forecasts. Okay, we at Coldwell Banker Managers, reference that extensively when we create our annual business models. So we really rely on Dr. Yun's forecasting. He actively participates in many other major economic panels, among them the Blue Chip Council, the Wall Street Journal Forecasting Survey. He's the doctor, as Dr. Fauci is for the coronavirus, Dr. Yun is for our real estate business. We rely on him very heavily. I can continue extolling on Dr. Yun's many qualifications and accomplishments, but I know you'd rather hear from him than me. Okay, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Lawrence Yun.
Well, thank you, Joe, for inviting me. This is clearly a challenging times currently, but as Joe referred to at the beginning, the economy, real estate market was quite healthy pre-pandemic. In fact, my projection late last year going into 2020 was to say, look, the home sales will be higher in 2020, home prices higher, so overall dollar revenue would be higher. Some people mentioned about that longest economic expansion ever in the US. And I said, well, we have to have some unexpected event because you have to look at all this data points. And the data points, it was not suggesting any fallout in the economy. But what do you know? We are hit with the most unexpected event in, at least for the economy, in the US history, where the virus spreading. Certainly don't want to have a repeat of, say, the Spanish flu of the 100 years ago, where, you know, something like 30 or 40 million people died globally. So we have to contain the virus to assure that the health of the people. But in the process, government order across many, many states, in the 50 states now, state of emergency, government order economic lockdown. That means that economy is just, due to the government orders, shut down. Now, because of the government-induced economic lockdown, the stimulus package is the largest ever by far. So substantial stimulus package into the place so that this temporary disruption would come out back, pretty much back to normal. Now, some industry will come back quite normal, up 100%. For example, say the small business owners of hair salons, daycare centers, dental offices. I mean, they need to get back up and running 100% or even 120% to make up for some of the lost time. But the other industries, say like the airline industry or the cruise ship, it may take a couple of years to be fully back online. They are known historical facts, but also there are many unknowns. So let's recognize that there are some unknowns, the path of the virus, whether a vaccine will be discovered. If vaccine is discovered, we're 100% back. Even our air travel, stadium can be full, you know, all that part, if the vaccine is quickly discovered. So let me go into my PowerPoint slide. It's just very brief because I want to have a little Q&A at the end. So if Dan can put the PowerPoint on the, okay, next slide. So this is the overall measure of the GDP. And it's been rising and rising for the past 10 years. In 2020, just every momentum factor suggested it should be higher, but now we know that it will be ugly, especially in the second quarter. Second quarter, it could be down as much as 30% or 35% in terms of GDP contraction. It is unheard of numbers. So never in American history have we seen any economic activity just fall off the cliff so suddenly. Keep in mind, we have a stimulus package in place. So we know that it is government-induced economic downturn, but also to compensate for that, extremely large stimulus package in place. Next slide. So if we look at the Connecticut market, we see that the jobs from the low point of 2009, so the middle of the chart, steadily rising, which was the source of the housing demand that one experienced. But one has to also recognize that in the state of Connecticut, it's been one of the weakest in the long-term job growth. So compared to year 2000, you see that there's little fluctuation going down, and up again, but no real net job creation, very unlike most other states in the country. And this is for the Connecticut residents, so to determine what's happening, talk with the elected officials. But the overall long-term job creation in Connecticut has been one of the slowest in the country with no new net job creation. This is something saddening, in fact, from the fact that one looks back 30 years ago or so, Connecticut was considered the wealthiest state in the whole nation. This is where the wealth and power resided for the country. But the last 10 years, or I should say 20 years, things are not making a progress upward, and with, say, General Electric leaving the state, one has to wonder, why are companies leaving the state? Is there something to entice company back into the state? But as Joe mentioned, given this pandemic period where people are now afraid, possibly of wanting to live in, say, high density city environment, or the fact that we are able to do this online presentation and many office meetings being held not in person but through Zoom, that people may say, look, I don't have to live close to the city. I can live further out in the suburbs because the employers will permit more at-home work possibilities. And if that's the case, one may see a demand in the suburbs region of the Fairfield County, as well as the Westchester County. So the increase in demand from that period. Going to the next slide. This next slide shows the employment condition for the for the New York City, the city itself, along with the Jersey City and White Plains, the Westchester County. I cannot separate out just pure Westchester County, but this shows that overall the New York City nearby area, the job growth has been actually quite solid. So difference comparison with, let's say, the Connecticut state versus what's happening in the nearby areas of the New York City and White Plains, where total job creation from the low point 10 years ago is almost 1.5 million job creation. So very solid job creation that has occurred. Next slide. But hitting the wall is leading to this huge spike in the people filing for unemployment insurance. But at least one sees some downward trend after the huge spike. Just like the coronavirus, how many new cases are there? So this is saying how many new cases of people who are filing for unemployment insurance. So you see a huge spikes and it's steadily declining. The numbers are still very large, but at least the trend is going downward. Next slide. For the how many people are still filing for unemployment insurance, not the very first time. And you see that if we add up the prior week with 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, total numbers are rising. But the total number that is rising is in fact not as all the sum of the first time cases, which is implying that in each week, which is not talked about in the media as much, there appears to be about 1 million job creation each week. In other words, 6 million people are filing for unemployment insurance, but people who filed last week or prior week, about 1 million are finding some jobs, whether it is at Costco, Amazon. So there is, even in this tough environment, some job creation that is occurring. Next slide. Looking at Connecticut, somehow it suddenly spiked in the today's data that came out. So there is a large number of people filing for unemployment insurance. Next slide. But in New York State, they don't have a breakout just for the city or the county, but for New York State, it's actually declining in terms of first-time filers. So Connecticut, you are seeing a spike, but in New York State, at least it's beginning to trend down. Maybe the first 3 weeks, there was a huge spikes level, but at least this trend is somewhat encouraging. One remark that I want to say is real estate agents, brokers, they are self-employed, independent contractors. They have made all the right decision pre-pandemic. And we lobby hard in Washington to say, look, realtors were active in the business, and this sudden shutdown in the economy should not hurt those entrepreneurs who have been making all the right decisions. So therefore, the unemployment insurance is now available for realtors for the very first time for independent contractors. And during this disruption, please tap into the financial resources. I don't know if New York State or Connecticut has already set up their computer programming to provide the unemployment insurance, but it may take a little time, but it is retroactive. So please document as to when the business activity suddenly slow down, so that you can at least tap into the resources during this disruptive temporary period. Once the economy reopens, I expect a strong surge in the activity, but please tap into it because we lobbied hard to say that realtors were making the right decision, and it is not the fault of the realtors as to why their business activity is suddenly down during this temporary pandemic period. Next slide. So housing market, as Joe alluded to, was very healthy. So you see the steady increases that has been occurring over the years. But note that what has happened back in 2005 and then sudden crash. I get questions from the reporters. are we going to have a repeat of 2005, 2006, and then foreclosure crisis? Back then, we had unit sales come down about 30%, home prices collapsing about 30%. So you can see that dollar volume had collapsed 60%. So are we going to have a repeat of that situation currently? First, understand the extremely large stimulus package. So that's one. Much, much larger than what happened back then. But there is also a factual difference. Again, facts are facts. Back in 07, 09 period, the subprime mortgages were blowing up. All those funny mortgages that overstretch people's budget, it was blowing up. Today, we don't have subprime lending. We have sound underwriting standard that keep people within their budget, so we don't have that situation. Other part was back then there was an overbuilding. Home builders went wild. This time around, home builders have actually been underproducing. And if there was one complaint among realtors, especially for mid-price and below, they were saying there was just insufficient inventory out in the marketplace. And the reasoning for that was the builders have been underproducing. So in other words, are we going to repeat what occurred during the Great Recession of 10 years ago? And answer is absolutely not as related to real estate, because we don't have subprime lending and we don't have overproduction situation. Next slide. And inventory across the country remaining low. I know that in the upper luxury market, there is plentiful inventory, very unique market, and also the changes in tax reform that was in place a few years ago, where it limited mortgage interest deduction as well as the property tax deduction. So it has harmed some of the upper end market, say in New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. So the price points, I have heard that in like Greenwich, some home that was what homeowner thought was $4 million, now they need to sell for say $3 million. But so many unique properties, some are seeing some price declines, big price declines, others seeing stable prices. This is pre-pandemic, just due to the tax reform of the mortgage interest deduction and property tax deduction of the past few years ago. But regarding the overall inventory situation, we are overall insufficient, especially on the mid-price and below. Next slide. The Federal Reserve, in the meantime, is all in, and they have reduced the interbank Fed funds rate to zero all at once. Back in 08, 09, it took the Federal Reserve 8 months to drag the interest rate down using multiple rounds of rate cut. This time around is a government-induced lockdown, so Federal Reserve said we are going in all at once, and hence we are essentially at an all-time low on mortgage rates. Next slide. And the mortgage rates generally follows the red line, which the red line is the 10-year Treasury. So you see that both are moving in a synchronized way. One thing to note is the very last data point. There is a large gap between the 10-year Treasury and the mortgage rates. So from my perspective, there is a room for mortgage rate to go down lower. So today, I think it's averaging about 3.3%. I think it could even go down to say 2.7 or 2.8% once all the financial market normalize. Financial market is not normalized, partly because we have a mortgage forbearance in place. Those facing economic hardship that can miss out on some of the mortgage payments during this hardship, whatever that is missed is not a free lunch. That missed payment will be simply tacked on at the end of the life of the loan. So it's not a free lunch, but at least it's giving time to those people who are facing economic hardship. But from mortgage servicer, say like JP Morgan, the money is not coming in because of mortgage forbearance, but they still have to pay back the money to the mortgage investors. They have to pay the property tax. They have to pay the homeowner insurance as a mortgage servicer. And where are they getting the money if the money is not coming in? So they're facing some cash crunch. And consequently, currently, the jumbo market is not working properly. So the credit score requirement is extremely high on jumbo mortgages, 20% down payment requirement. And we are currently asking the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, to say, look, jumbo market is very important. It's part of the health of the housing market. So please provide like short-term loans to JP Morgan. And once this mortgage forbearance period is over, and as JP Morgan receive those mortgage payments, then they can repay the Federal Reserve. So it's a very simple fix. So we think that there will be some fixing to the jumbo market, but in the interim, today it's not functioning. We hope it is almost back to normal within a few weeks. So just be patient on the jumbo mortgage market. Next slide. And the home builders clearly underproducing over the recent years, and you see the overproduction back during the Great Recession period. So we had oversupply. Today we have undersupply because of multiple years of underproduction. Next slide. So let's look at the coronavirus impact. Next slide. So we've been doing a weekly survey of buyers and sellers, or realtors who have buyers or sellers in the marketplace. So what is the buyer's expectation regarding home prices? 37% do not believe, even with this large increase in unemployment, filers, disruption to the economy, that 37% do not believe there will be a price reduction. Maybe they face some multiple bidding on the entry-level home. They knew that there was a housing shortage. And during the pandemic period, there is even fewer listings than pre-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, we had inventory shortage. Today, post-pandemic, or I should say during the pandemic, we have even fewer listings. So 37% of the buyers do not expect lower prices. 16%, maybe less than 5%, because many buyers never want to offer that listed price. They want to do maybe 98% of the listed price. Then the remainder expects some more discounted in prices. But what about the seller sentiment? Vast majority, 72% of the sellers are saying they will not be reducing prices. In other words, there's no sense of panic among sellers. Sellers simply view this period as temporary, so whatever listed price will be the price pretty much what was pre-pandemic. They're sensing no panic situation. And we don't anticipate any rise in foreclosures because of that mortgage forbearance period. Excuse me. But once the stimulus package is up, economy reopens, and excuse me, most job losses do return back. Again, think about the hair salon, dental offices, daycare. So as good number of jobs do return, then the sellers will be beginning to put their homes on the market, because another part that is not shown here is many of the sellers are saying they will list once the economy reopens fully. So not during the stay in shelter orders, but once the economy begins to open fully, they're going to begin to list their home onto the market. And always be cognizant, 70% of the sellers are listing in order to buy. So, they are listing and they also become buyers conditions. So there's a little postponement, but it seems like the home prices looks to be holding on based on the sentiment. Economic logic say home prices will stay on because we had a housing shortage. We have even fewer listings, but once the economy reopens, we will have more listings coming on, but the buyers will also be coming back onto the market at that time. So we think that overall there will be that inventory shortage on mid-price and below. Luxury market is different. There's always been an oversupply situation, and it's a unique property. It will take a little long time to find buyers for unique properties. Next slide. Stimulus, I've mentioned many times, so let me just go over briefly. So if you're a broker, please tap into the Small Business Administration loan. Second tranche will be available, or at least will be available later today, because House of Representatives is scheduled to vote today. Senate already approved, and then it will go to President's desk, which he will approve, which means that the banking relationship you have, go and tap into the resources. It is called a loan, but it turns into a grant if you meet certain criteria. Essentially, you don't have to pay the money back. So please keep that in mind. And also, unemployment insurance is an enhanced unemployment insurance, which means that on average across the country, it will be something like $1,100 per week. Each week, person receiving $1,100 per week. So because of that $600 enhancement by the federal government. For few individuals, the unemployment check will actually be larger than the employment they had. Say somebody working at a cashier suddenly realize that unemployment check is actually larger. But the purpose is to say that this disruption is not the fault of the workers. We want to assure that there is plenty of cash ready to spend once the economy reopens. The other part, the mortgage forbearance, the freeze on the foreclosures, so don't expect any oversupply situation. Quantitative easing on mortgages, so mortgage rate may go down below 3% in, say, next month time period, because that spread that I showed you is a little larger than normal. Next slide. So how is the federal government financing all this unemployment check and other stimulus measures? They are running up a huge budget deficit. It is the right thing to do to assure that the economy do not lose its grip and fall off the cliff. So massive stimulus in place. But how is the federal government getting the money? Without going into long explanation, it's essentially printing of the money. So if the Federal Reserve is printing money, doesn't that mean that we could have inflation in the future? America is very fortunate to have this extraordinary privilege of having the US dollar. Because of the US dollar, we will not have inflation, at least not immediately. Globally, financial panic, people want the US dollar. So because of that situation, we will not have inflation. However, if you talk with people who experienced the 1970s, there was inflation, and that came from printing of a lot of money. So maybe not next year or 2 years from now, but say 5 or 6 years from now, we may have a little higher than normal inflation. And if we have a little higher than normal inflation, then some people want to hedge against inflation. How do they hedge? Well, some people want to buy gold as a hedge, but real estate has also become a very good inflation hedge. So in future years, you may see some people wanting to buy real estate just to protect against the inflation hedge. So that is a possibility. Next slide. So my forecast is the following. Second quarter would be absolutely ugly because it's an imposed economic lockdown. But third quarter and fourth quarter would be positive. And it's, second quarter off the chart negative, third quarter off the chart positive. However, the positive number in the later part of the year will be unable to make up for the big loss that happened in the second quarter. So the year as a whole, GDP will be negative, about 4 million net job losses. As many of the people who are currently unemployed, they will regain their job, but not everyone. So we have a 4 million job losses. Home prices will be roughly stable. We are missing out on the spring buying season. It's hard to make up for this loss in the spring buying season. So the unit sales may be down about 5 or 10% this year. But going into 2021, all the lights light up again. So positive GDP growth, job gains, home prices, especially with so much stimulus money in the pipeline that it is just bound to begin to come out from the second half of this year, in fact, but the momentum will carry on into 2021. Next slide. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Joe, again, for inviting me to share some information.
Joe, I think you might be muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Dr. Yoon. Don't run away. We have we've got some questions for you, but you've pretty much validated what we've been saying all along. I mean, inventory is low. This is a health crisis, not a real estate crisis. We certainly need listings, and some industries, as you pointed out, the recovery may be U-shaped, it may be L-shaped. But we firmly believe that real estate, there is a pent-up demand for real estate. So the recovery, we think, is going to be V-shaped. And, we're starting to see that now. Anecdotally, I've heard of, just in the last couple of weeks, as you aptly pointed out, we've got a number of transactions that are being put together virtually. So that says something about the demand. And again, the numbers that you had said, and for everybody in the audience, this is going to be recorded. This is being recorded, so you can see it again. And for those of you who want, more in-depth analysis of the information, you'll be able to do so on the recording. So, Dan, do you want to see if we have some questions for Dr. Yun in the pipeline there?
Absolutely. And I'll just say before we do it, Dr. Yun, you will have to unmute your microphone, but one of the big questions is regarding migration. I think we're seeing a lot of interest into Westchester County, and then especially up the shoreline from New York City particularly. Do you see this as a long-term trend as a result of this pandemic?
Just on the sentiment that given that even if we find a vaccine for COVID-19, one has to wonder when the next virus could potentially come apart. For commercial real estate developer, I think someone who is thinking really deeply into the future may want to consider that some of the large vacant shopping centers to work, to talk with the government to see if they can turn that into a healthcare armory, so that if there's a next time health crisis, the armory is already there to produce masks, ventilators, and also extra hospital beds in that empty shopping centers. So rather than tearing it down, the shopping centers are generally located in a centralized location where people would have relatively easy drive to it. So some creative commercial developers may want to consider that, talking with the government. And I think the federal government will probably provide more funding to prepare for the next time. But in terms of the migration, yeah, certainly. One is living in a high-rise apartments, trying to share elevators. And furthermore, I am fairly confident that more employers will offer at home work responsibilities. Zoom technology has clearly demonstrated much of the work can be done at home, online, rather than being in office. And given that, there could be more leisure schedule about when one has to really come to office. And if that is the case, the commute time is not as important, and hence they can live further out, whether it is in Long Island suburbs, Connecticut suburbs, the White Plains, Westchester County, and therefore the demand could be high. You saw the job growth in the New York City area pre-pandemic. All that job creation and huge demand for just housing in New York City, but now if they want to live further out, one can imagine quite sizable. But also one has to consider the negative. Negative is the long-term trend of retirees in Connecticut and New York. They're going to Florida. So is there a way to induce people not necessarily to go to Florida, but just have a second home in Florida? Just keep the home in Connecticut. So have a dual home, maybe that inflation hedge, to have real estate as a hedge against inflation. Maybe that is the sort of driver. But one also has to consider, is tax rates too high in Connecticut and New York as to why people are fleeing New York and Connecticut to other states. But that's for the residents and the public officials to determine.
Dr. Yun, you are preaching to the choir, or the converted, as they say, when you talk about high real estate taxes and the SALT deduction, especially for Connecticut and New York. So thank you. Dan, we have more questions. Dan, you may want to take the slide off the screen so that we can see Dr. Yun full on.
Oh, I think it might be sharing. If everyone can see Dr. Yun on the screen, just let me know in your comments. That'd be great in the chat box. A lot of questions coming in regarding foreclosures, Dr. Yun, and your thoughts on foreclosures in the future as a result of job loss.
So if the job losses continue well past the next 12 months and beyond, then it becomes a concern because now we are saying that stimulus package was insufficient to get the economy back on track. But we also have to recognize the foreclosures, even in that case, the foreclosures will be more related to job losses and not to bad mortgages blowing up, which happened 10 years ago. So at least from the bad mortgage, the subprime mortgages, we don't have that. So it will be more job related foreclosures. But over the next 12 months, I mean, there's a 12-month mortgage forbearance period for people who are negatively impacted. They cannot pay mortgages. They can skip out for 6 months. Again, talk to the mortgage servicer first. Don't just miss out on the payment to get the approval. Then after the 6 months, they need additional 6 months. They can again reapply. This is for most mortgages. I mean, for government-backed mortgages, it's automatic, but most mortgages, you have to talk to the servicer. Some cases where it's not government-backed mortgage, they may say we will not allow for mortgage forbearance, and that would be a little tricky situation. But my understanding is that most private lenders, even without government backing, they are permitting this special temporary mortgage forbearance period. But the forecast overall, whether it is my forecast or forecast by JP Morgan economists, Goldman Sachs economists, essentially they are saying we're going to have a terrible negative second quarter, then we're going to have a recovery. Whether it's a V-shaped recovery or U-shaped recovery, we are going to have a recovery. And every forecast that I see shows positive number in 2021. So I mean, almost consensus among economists is that economy will be growing. Jobs are being created, and if that's the condition, I mean, the foreclosure should not be a concern going into 2021. And in 2020, we have the mortgage forbearance.
Great, thank you, Dr. Yoon. A question, an interesting question coming in here regarding traditional disruptors like Zillow. Zillow in this Corona environment. You know, do you feel that Zillow, what impact has Zillow had? Do you feel it has destroyed our ecosystem and economy as realtors as far as connecting consumers with realtors?
You know, in a free market system, there's always some people want to try out different business models. Zillow, I guess they tried the ad revenue model of trying to have the agents pay subscription to have their faces on property which they did not list, which actually confuses the consumer. So it didn't really help out the consumers much. From my perspective, I know that many agents utilize Zillow to advertise and get business that way. But the Zillow changed their CEO about 1 year ago, and their new business model was that iBuyer program. So as soon as we had this situation of pandemic, I mean, they are withdrawing the iBuyer. I'm not sure how the Wall Street will be, but the other part is whether it is Zillow or other disruptors. It's interesting that Wall Street is able to fund business model that is keep losing money. And from traditional brokerages, it's hard to sometimes very challenging to compete against business that are willing to lose money for a long period. So we'll see how the shakeout occurs.
Thank you. So we have a question.
We can read between the lines, Dr. Yoon.
We have a question. CNBC reported this morning that home buyers are out there are serious and that they have not seen an unusual amount of contracts not close in March, although the number of contracts being written are down 30%. Have you seen a higher percentage of contracts written in states that have less stringent stay-at-home guidelines?
Most Americans are being compliant with governor's orders. So when they say stay at home, most people are saying, okay, I'm going to delay my home buying activity for a couple of months until the economy reopens. So we have seen both listing decline significantly, but also the buyer interest through the survey decline significantly. But in terms of the comparison, is the following. Virginia, where I am here at home, activity appears to be down about 30%. Again, this is just temporary because most people are just want to be compliant, down about 30%. But in Pennsylvania, where you cannot even do a physical visit of a home, I heard a realtor almost got arrested by a police officer for trying to enter a house where, for sale sign, because Pennsylvania is a very restrictive. In that area, the number of the activity is down double that amount, 60, 70%. So there is a variation, but I think once the economy reopens, there will be more spring forward activity in Pennsylvania versus Virginia. So whatever, depending on the lockdown, I'm not saying one way or the other is better, but whatever that is not occurring today, I think it's just a delayed activity. One interesting thing on Virginia versus Pennsylvania is look at international, and I'm sure many health experts are looking into this. Dr. Birch, Dr. Fauci, as they are evaluating how Europeans economies are reopening, because they had the coronavirus first. But in South Korea, because I was born in South Korea, I mean, I'm a US citizen, but because of that, I sort of monitor South Korea situation. It's not a lockdown. People are walking in the street. Restaurants are actually full in South Korea, but in South Korea, they have flattened the curve. And what they're finding out is having a mask on as people are walking, 6 feet distance, that is sufficient. But one thing they have in South Korea, which America does not have, is that contact tracing. 90% of the people with virus in South Korea know from whom they got it. And as soon as they contact, they said, okay, I was in contact with you. Please stay at home for 14 days before returning. And that appears to have flattened the curve. And I know in the US, we are greatly improving on the contact tracing and testing. So it's possible that in a month, economy can reopen and safely, everything will be very safe. So we may have a little faster recovery path. But I'm not a health expert, but I'm just looking at different country comparison part. So, vaccine discovery, that will be hallelujah. But even if the vaccine takes longer, maybe South Korea is demonstrating that people can be out on the street, they can go to the stores, they can visit restaurants. All that is fine as long as we have that contact tracing and testing in place.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Yoon. The last question that came in, and then I think this will be our final one, is regarding commercial property values. So what will be the net impact on commercial property values as incomes for landlords decrease? What are your thoughts on commercial?
This one is a very difficult call. Because how much the stimulus package will provide to the small business owners and how they use that amount to pay the rent, or whether they skip on the rent and pay the employment. This is very tough, and I'm not sure how it will shake out. But one thing pre-pandemic was that industrial properties, meaning warehousing, demand was very strong. Well, demand has even surged during the current period. But the retail shops, Main Street shops, the demand was soft pre-pandemic, and now it's going to be even softer because of it. So it's going to be very difficult in terms of the property valuation, how that will play out. One comforting factor may be that interest rates are so low that when interest rates are low, it keeps the cap rates down, which means that it keeps the property level down. But there's temporary disruption, hard to judge how the commercial real estate market, especially on the retail shops, will play out.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Yoon. Joe, I'm sending over to you now.
Dr. Yoon, we'd like you to just hang with us for 5 more minutes because I'm about to introduce Kate Rossi. But before I do that, I really want to thank you. You can take all of this empirical data, get it all assembled, and then in layman's terms, really be able to explain it to all of us. So that's very much appreciated. As I said, you are our Dr. Fauci, okay, the real estate version. And I know you're supposed to be impartial to all the real estate companies and brands and what have you, but we do have our new North Star logo, and we've got one of these beautiful vests. As soon as I can get back into my office, it's got your name on it, so we will send it to you, and we hope you wear it in good health and in the spirit of why we're sending it. And again, thank you very much. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to meet Kate Rossi. Kate is the Senior Vice President for the Realogy Brokerage Group, Coldwell banker, pretty much for the whole East Coast and including Texas. And what she's been saying for the last couple of months is exactly what you've been saying. So I don't know if you guys, like doing this like mental telepathy thing, but Kate, I'd like you to, kick us off here and really kind of end us on a high note.
Okay, well, first of all, I really enjoyed your talk, and I really want to emulate what you said. At the end of the day, guys, we're in real estate. This is not like, and I said this before, we're not the restaurant business where the food has spoiled. We're not like the airline industry where people aren't traveling. We're not like the hotel where people have canceled vacations. There is pent-up demand right now. And the thing I've been saying, and I kind of like what you said, Doctor, that think about Manhattan. We're all confined to our homes right now. And if you're in a fabulous view with 1-bedroom, studio, or whatever it is in Manhattan right now, you've got to be going crazy. This has made people think, I got to get out of here. The minute this thing is over, I'm going to suburbia. And that's Westchester, Connecticut. And I do believe we are going to see an influx of people moving out of the city. Now, is that good for the city? The city will always be fine. After 9/11, I told you guys, that October was our strongest month ever in Manhattan. So people will always want to invest in Manhattan. But I do believe after this pandemic, people are going to want to get out. The thing that I would really focus on, really, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, is call people and talk to them. Talk to your past customers, talk to your sphere, talk to the people in your neighborhoods and ask them how they're doing. And tell them at the end of this tunnel, we're going to need inventory because we were lacking it in January and February, and we're still lacking it now. There are multiple offers in your Fairfield market area currently going on where people are seeing a heck of a buy and they want to buy it. They're buying it virtually. They're doing everything differently right now. And that's okay. We might adjust our inventory by doing certain things that way. But to me, the agent, the company that controls the inventory, once this crazy thing is over, okay, is going to win. And that's each and every one of you. We can predict what's going to happen across the country. But I believe in the entrepreneur, the real estate agent. And right now, I believe in each and every one of you. And if you're gathering inventory right now, get it ready, ready to be listed. Because like the doctor said, interest rates are fabulous. If they go lower, that's like beyond free money. When I started, interest rates were 18%. And we still sold real estate. Had to be a little creative, but we sold it. So all I'm wishing for each and every one of you, stay healthy, stay safe, and don't sit and boo-hoo. Start talking to people and get them ready to get on the market. When we get out of this thing, we'll be stronger than ever before. And just remember, you're moving America. You kids move America, and there's no place like home. Good seeing everyone.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Dr. Yoon, and thank you all for tuning in. I hope this was as enjoyable and as informative for you as it was for me. Again, this is being recorded so that you're able to come back and view it again if you'd like, and you can tell your colleagues who have missed it that they missed something really good and they can view it as well. So, as Kate said, stay healthy, stay safe, call somebody today. Have a great day.